The International Criminal Court is seeking arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the leaders of terrorist group Hamas. But what effect will this have on the ongoing negotiations? Will it bring us any closer to the end of the war? This is World at War. I'm the Sun's defence editor, Jerome Starkey, and joining me today is Admiral West, former First Sea Lord and Security and Cyber Minister. Lord West, thank you very much for joining us. This shock news yesterday from the ICC issuing, or rather the prosecutor, British prosecutor Karim Khan, requesting these arrest warrants, both for the leaders of Hamas, but indeed also for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Just tell me, first of all, what was your reaction to that news?
I was sort of surprised it suddenly came out, and I have to say I'm not sure that it actually helps anything. I don't think it'll help stop the killings in Gaza. I think it muddies the water. I think there's always a danger when one looks at these things and you have a go at both sides that you're mixing up apples and pears. You know, things can be very different, and therefore I was surprised. As I say, and I don't think it really achieves anything at all, because I think you've got to make some of these judgments are extremely difficult, and they tie in with historical things. And what are you looking at precisely? You're looking at an exact action that's being completed. I find it quite difficult, actually.
Would you agree? I mean, Israel has called it outrageous, suggesting, and Joe Biden's called it unhelpful, and the suggestion that perhaps it creates parity between what Israel has done and is doing in the Gaza Strip and what Hamas has done. I mean, do you recognise that? Does it?
I certainly do, and I think there is a danger of that. And I mean, we saw that, of course, in the Northern Ireland things, where basically there was now there's sort of people looking at things as if they're on a level playing field, but actually the terrorists went out with the aim of killing people. Whether they were innocent or not innocent, whatever, but with the aim of killing people every day, whereas the British soldiers went out every day with the aim of protecting all people in Northern Ireland. That was a huge difference. To put them on the same playing field is completely wrong, and we've still seen that. So there is a real danger, I think, in doing that, because there's no doubt the terrorists and terrorism, as was found in Northern Ireland, the reason the Northern Ireland Good Friday came along wasn't because the terrorists won. The terrorists were losing every single day. I mean, the numbers of them were being banged up more than ever. We had completely penetrated all of their cells, and they knew that they were losing on that side, and they suddenly said, well, why don't we have a sort of diplomatic agreement? Which actually, why didn't they do that originally? Terrorism is an awful thing, and I'm afraid it generally doesn't achieve its aim. It just causes real problems.
Do you see any prospects for a Good Friday style agreement, in between Israel and Palestine? I mean, clearly that would be the hope of many, that there is a sustainable long-term peace is possible. But many would say that what we've seen over the last 6, 7, nearly 8 months since the October 7 terrorist attack has made that, even more of a distant prospect.
Well, I think getting some sort of accord is extremely difficult. It's very difficult to know, for example, what exactly does Israel intend to do, and when we know this is some people would argue this has been going on for thousands of years. It's certainly been going on since 1948, and there are all sorts of complexities and things involved with it. I think in terms of judging actions of the Israelis today in Gaza, you've in a way almost got to separate it all from all the historical aspects, or from what they're doing in the West Bank, or from what their plans are for the future. Basically, they are doing a military operation in a very built-up area in Gaza. That is an extremely difficult thing to do, as we know, which is why we try and keep out of, our planning for things is to try and keep out of those sort of operations. But in Fallujah, for example, and in Mosul, the numbers of civilians that the Allies were killing, the Americans and ourselves, was way more than the IDF are killing for each terrorist killed. I think these judgments are so difficult, and we know, if you look at the Second World War, the killings when fighting went into cities, particularly if the people involved, and it was Nazis doing it then, used civilians as shields, were dreadful, and it's very difficult to make certain judgments, I think.
Lord West, you mentioned UK intelligence penetration of the terrorist groups in Northern Ireland, the IRA predominantly. We had been led to believe Israel's intelligence services have a formidable international reputation, both Mossad and Shin Bet. And yet, the October 7th attack appeared to take them and clearly the world by surprise. Have you got any sense of how those apparent intelligence failures might have come about, and whether or not Israel has any hope of sort of regaining that penetration, that intelligence penetration, which might lead to some sort of peace settlement ultimately?
Well, first of all, I should say I have no inside knowledge on this, even though I sit on the ISC and was Chief of Defence Intelligence. So I have no inside knowledge. What I would say is I was amazed that they didn't have any warning of this. Absolutely amazed. I think after this fighting is finished, no doubt the Israelis will be looking at this very closely. But I think there clearly was a major failure of intelligence, because actually even the little bits I've seen showed there were strands in the wind that showed something was going to happen. And I'm also amazed that the Americans, who are very, very close on issues to do with the Middle East, with the Israeli intelligence service, that the Americans didn't. I mean, the Americans have got a hugely capable intelligence service. We weren't focusing on it to the same degree, and our intelligence people weren't. So I think there's been a failure of Israeli and American intelligence on this issue, and they will want to do a very big look at how the hell did we let this happen, because it's led to where we are now, which is one hell of a mess, let's face it.
And my final question is, do you have any sense of what might happen on day one after the war? Do you see any planning for the future of Gaza?
I am extremely worried that I don't think we've seen any real thought going into this. And of course, you then open up the whole business as well of, what's happening on the West Bank, Israeli, actions there, the whole issue of two-state solution. I mean, these are huge issues, and I think, people have different views about, how they should be tackled. But a large number of people, I share it a bit. I think the Israelis need to show a bit of flexibility in that. But I have huge sympathy for them after that barbaric, appalling attack by Hamas on October the 7th, which was just utterly dreadful. And the fact that I'm afraid the Hamas top hamper leadership just want to kill Jews and wipe out Israel. That is a pretty appalling thing. And so, although there are these other issues, it's a very, very difficult. I couldn't find an answer to it. I mean, if one could, my goodness me, one would be straight to the top, wouldn't you? And I don't think a lot of other people have, but we've got to try and do that.
I do want to ask just one more question, actually, which is about the Royal Navy's involvement. We know that there is an RFA vessel in the Eastern Mediterranean supporting the US-built pier, trying to get humanitarian aid into Gaza. Do you see those, is that pier, do you think that pier is going to be an effective route of getting aid into Gaza, or would you like to see more being done on the land crossings as well?
I mean, I think it's quite a good way of doing things if you can't get the land crossings open. I think it's better than dropping it from aircraft. It's the distribution is really difficult, and I don't think we want to get our troops or our people involved in that, because, Hamas have their own agenda about they want to control that because it's a way of controlling the population, all sorts of things. So we want to keep out of that. But I think it's quite a good way of getting stuff in, and you can always get a lot of stuff by sea. So that's good. But obviously the best way of doing it was a technique they knew already, that they'd used already, which is using lorries and lots of lorries. And there was a procedure and a method of doing it. That having been broken down, yes, let's use some sea ones, but it would be very good to get the crossings open and lorries going again.
Lord West, thank you very much for joining us. This is World at War. I'm The Sun's defence editor, Jerome Starkey, and if you're watching on YouTube and you have any questions, then please ask them in the comments below and we will try to answer them next week.